As the clock struck midnight, an eerie silence descended upon the desolate petrol station. Blanketed by the inky blackness of the night, the station stood as an island of artificial light, a beacon in the darkness. A lone worker, our protagonist, manned this outpost. Stripped of his name for now, let's just call him the night shift worker. He was a creature of habit, a solitary figure, his life punctuated by the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional chime of the cash register. The petrol station was his kingdom, his castle in the night. He knew every inch of the place, from the worn-down linoleum floors to the flickering neon sign that proudly announced "Open 24 hours." The shelves were stocked with an array of snacks and forgotten necessities, a testament to the transitory visitors who passed through in search of fuel and refreshment. Each night was a repetition of the last, the same tasks, the same routine. But there was comfort in the predictability, a sense of control in the familiar. The night shift worker was content in his solitude, finding peace in the quiet hours when the world around him slumbered. But tonight, the silence was shattered. The growl of an engine sliced through the tranquility. The bright headlights of an approaching car pierced the darkness, casting long, distorted shadows across the station forecourt. A car pulled up to the pump, its engine idling like a beast in wait. From the car emerged a figure, a man obscured by the shadows. He moved with an air of mystery, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. His request was simple, a full tank. And with that, he disappeared into the convenience store, leaving the night shift worker alone with the idling beast. The station returned to its silence, the only sound the rhythmic pulse of fuel filling the tank. But something had shifted. The air was thick with anticipation, the night pregnant with unease. Unbeknownst to our protagonist, this was no ordinary customer, and this was about to become no ordinary night. As the man disappeared into the store, a strange metallic sound echoed through the night. The humdrum of the petrol station seemed to pause for a moment. The usual sounds of late-night traffic and the distant hum of the city replaced by a dissonant symphony of uncertainty. Instinctively, the worker turned his attention to the source of the sound, a low-slung car parked by the pumps. Curiosity piqued. He stepped out from behind the counter, his shoes crunching on the gravel as he approached the vehicle. There, nestled between the worn leather seats, was something out of place. A small, sinister-looking object, its surface gleaming ominously under the harsh glare of the station lights. He reached out, hesitated, then picked it up. It was heavier than he expected, cold to the touch and utterly unidentifiable. As he turned the object over in his hand, a sense of unease began to creep up his spine. Something about this object, about this night, felt off. The station's lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced across his face. The air seemed to grow heavier, the silence deeper, as if the night was holding its breath. The metallic door chime jingled abruptly, pulling him from his thoughts. The mysterious man reappeared from the store, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of his hat. He paid for his petrol, his eyes never leaving the worker. With a curt nod, the man stepped back into his car and sped off, leaving a trail of dust hanging in the air. The echo of the man's departure left a chilling silence, leaving our protagonist alone with his thoughts and the mysterious object. His heart pounded in his chest, the quiet of the petrol station now feeling less like solitude and more like isolation. He looked down at the object in his hand, its unknown purpose only adding to the growing sense of dread. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a night he would never forget. With the mystery object still in hand, an uncanny feeling of being watched started to creep in. A shiver ran up the spine of our lone worker, as the silence of the night was slowly replaced by strange noises. The hum of the refrigerators, the distant rustle of the wind outside, everything seemed to take on an eerie life of its own. Suddenly there was a clatter from the corner where the cans of motor oil sat. It was as if some invisible hand had knocked them over. Our worker's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to look, but there was nothing to see. Only the cans, now scattered across the floor. In the midst of this unsettling scene, the lights in the petrol station began to flicker. One moment, the fluorescent tubes bathed the room in a harsh white light. The next, they plunged it into near darkness. This pattern repeated, creating an ominous strobe effect that made the worker's skin crawl. Feeling the weight of the situation, he decided to reach out for help. But when he picked up the phone, the line was dead. No dial tone, no chance of a lifeline. The silence on the other end was as chilling as the unseen presence that had begun to make itself known. The sense of dread intensified. The worker, now gripped by fear, decided he had endured enough. He resolved to leave the station to escape from the unseen terror that had turned a mundane night shift into a nightmare. His heart pounded like a drum as he approached the door. His hand reached out, his fingers wrapping around the cool metal of the handle. But as he pulled, the door refused to budge. He yanked harder, his panic rising. But it was as if the door had become a part of the wall itself. But as he reached for the door, it jammed. He was trapped. The realization hit him like a cold wave. He was alone in the petrol station, with an unseen presence that had no intention of letting him go. The night was far from over, and the real terror was just beginning. As the reality of his situation set in, the worker started to panic. His mind raced, trying to rationalize the events that unfolded, but the eerie air of the petrol station seemed to amplify his fears. The strange happenings had escalated from mere oddities to a haunting nightmare, and he was trapped in its chilling grip. Driven by a primal instinct to understand, he mustered the courage to communicate with the unseen presence. His voice echoed through the station. "What do you want?" he asked, his words trembling in the cold silence. He waited, his heartbeat pounding in his ears, the stillness of the night amplifying every sound, every whisper. Then a flicker, the lights in the station began to dance, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the walls. A chilling draft swept through the station, raising goosebumps on his skin. The flickering lights seemed to dance in a rhythm, an eerie waltz that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. And then, as if guided by an unseen hand, the lights illuminated a section of the wall. His eyes widened in horror as he saw it, a message scrawled in a hasty, desperate hand. It was as if the very walls of the petrol station were crying out, speaking a truth that had long been buried. His heart pounded in his chest as he read the message, his breath hitching in his throat. The words were simple, yet they held a depth of meaning that sent a chill down his spine. "Return what is not yours." The message was clear, but what did it mean? What was it that he had to return? The answer was a mystery, hidden deep within the shadows of the petrol station. As he stood there, staring at the message, the gravity of his situation hit him. He was not alone, and the unseen presence was not going to rest until its request was fulfilled. The message read, "Return what is not yours." The words echoed in his mind, a haunting mantra that would guide his actions in the terrifying hours to come. With trembling hands, the worker held up the mysterious object. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum, echoing the fear that gripped him. The strange, eerie object had become the symbol of his terror-filled night at the petrol station. Gathering his courage, he moved slowly, every step echoing in the empty station. He went to the entrance, his fingers still trembling, reached out to place the object gently on the ground outside the station. The night air was still, and the only sound was the soft hum of the station's lights. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. He then spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said, addressing the unseen entity. It felt strange talking to thin air, but he didn't have a choice. He needed to make things right. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I didn't know." The words hung in the air, heavy with his sincerity and fear, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, everything changed. The air felt lighter. The oppressive feeling that had filled the station evaporated. The strange occurrences that had plagued him all night ceased immediately. It was as if a great weight had been lifted, a sigh of relief echoing through the station. The door, which had been stubbornly refusing to open, creaked slightly. He turned, surprised. Slowly, it swung open, revealing the outside world. He stood there for a moment, disbelief washing over him, before rushing out, leaving the petrol station behind. The night had been long, filled with an unseen presence and haunting realizations. But as he looked back at the station, now bathed in the soft glow of dawn, he felt a sense of relief. He had survived the night, faced his fears, and come out the other side. As the sun began to rise, our protagonist realized that some night shifts are darker than others. But he also realized that even in the face of the unknown, courage and understanding can light the way to resolution.